Good morning, everyone. I'm Ron Denard, Chief Financial Officer of United Way of Metro Chicago, and I'm truly delighted to be with you today for our Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Solidarity. At United Way of Metro Chicago, our commitment is simple and unwavering to build a stronger, more equitable Chicago region where every person has the opportunity to thrive. Our work follows a two-part strategy. First, we focus on meeting urgent everyday needs across our region. Through our unrestricted impact grants, we support more than 130 nonprofit organizations providing essential services such as food access, stable housing, and healthcare. And through 211 Metro Chicago, which is our free confidential health line, which is available 24/7, we connect residents to vital health and social services when they need them most. Secondly, we invest in long term transformative change through our neighborhood network initiatives. These coalitions are working hand in hand with residents to drive growth, strengthen local leadership, and build thriving communities throughout Chicagoland. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is meaningful to us not only because we honor Dr. King's legacy, but because of the values he embodied. Walking alongside communities, advancing justice, and striving for lasting positive change. Those values are central to United Way's mission. There is still much work ahead. We're energized by the incredible efforts happening today in neighborhoods across Chicago, and we're grateful to highlight some of that work with our guests. Dr. King spoke about the power of solidarity, the power of communities joining together in shared struggle and shared hope. Today, we're focusing on one powerful example of that spirit right here on Chicago's West Side and the Southwest sides, the One Lawndale Initiative. You'll hear more about that inspiring effort shortly. But first, it's my honor to introduce our moderator for the day, Morgan Elise Johnson. Morgan is the co founder and the publisher of The Tribe, and that's with two I's, an independent Black owned publication dedicated to reshaping the narrative of Black Chicago in pursuit of truth and liberation. We're proud to partner with The Tribe to bring today's program to you. Thank you again for spending your morning with United Way. And now I'm pleased to welcome Morgan.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here celebrating the work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. At the Tribe, we see ourselves as a publication that's most accountable to community, and we follow in the tradition of the abolitionist Black press. I like to think that we are a publication that Dr. Martin Luther King would be proud of, because we definitely try to be a publication that would have been a publication that he deserved. In his time, he was covered as an agitator, right? People didn't want to see Dr. Martin Luther King coming into their community, because that meant that, the community was about to turn up. Some things were about to get stirred up. And in fact, Dr. Martin Luther King in 1966, I believe, gave a speech in front of 300,000 people about housing and equity. So I'm so grateful to be here to partner on this program. I wish that the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King would have really pulled us through that game yesterday, but unfortunately we fell short. Um, But yeah, as you know, Dr. King spent much time in Chicago. And while he did, he lived in one of the neighborhoods we're talking about today, North Lawndale. The Tribe, if you didn't know, we opened a studio on the west side of Chicago as well, but in East Garfield Park. So I love that we share in that legacy of uplifting the west side and rooting ourselves in the west side of Chicago. United Way's celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Junior Day last year included a tour of a North Lawndale community led by Chicago's best storyteller, Sherman Dilla Thomas. To help ground us in the local history of this great leader, we have a short video featuring some footage from that tour. Let's take a look.
Those who don't know me, my name is Dilla. I'm a Chicago historian, lifelong Chicagoan. Lived on the South Side my whole life, public school educated, and then started a TikTok channel about the history of Chicago. And it was really started to combat some of the negativity that permeates the internet and the national news as it relates to our city. Today we're here to talk about Dr. King's time in Chicago. We're now in North Lawndale. North Lawndale is where King spent a ton of time doing his Chicago Freedom Campaign. It's also where Dr. King lived. He moves here in the winter of 1965. And the thing that brings him to Chicago is housing. In 1965/66, King was already a rock star. He had already won the Nobel Peace Prize. He had already given the I Have a Dream speech. He could have lived anywhere. When he made the decision to come to Chicago, they offered to put him up in the Palmer House. He said no, because he wanted to live like people actually lived over here. People are there to speak about what they're living through and the living conditions as it relates to segregation, inadequate housing for the poor, lack of public housing, absentee landlords. And it was all these things that brought King to Chicago. On this tour, we're going to talk about the past, but we're also going to talk about the legacy of King that's alive today. What I like to say on all tours is that if something has a name, it has a history. You see a name of a school, Google it, and see why that name is that name, and see what kind of lessons of history we can learn by simply learning the history behind the names that we pass by every day. Michelle Clark High School. So Michelle Clark happens to be the first black woman to be an on-air news anchor for CBS. In fact, she was on the short list to be one of the co-hosts for 60 Minutes. Douglas Park. Formerly it was named after Stephen A. Douglas. Some little girl decided to find out the history behind the name. Not only was she able to come to grips with it, but she was able to do something for the future. We changed the name of Douglas Park to Douglas Park. We simply added an S at the end, and now it's named for Frederick and Anna Douglass, the black abolitionists. Now other little kids who spend time in this massively beautiful park will not have to spend that time playing under the moniker of a person who didn't respect them as human beings. And that's sure enough an example of King's spirit being alive today. Part of all my tours, we visit something cool and local, so we're going to step into the Be Love. There's a lot of organizations that get to really do good work because of generosity of folks like you all who are on the bus. You know, it makes a difference. I'm humbled by the stuff that I hear from people. Think what we just did for Be Love Cafe. And I'm able to do that for small businesses from the support I get from folks like the United Way. And when non-for-profits and organizations and activists come to marginalized spaces and provide simply information, it's transformative. You know, I like to say I'm the byproduct of when you all get it right. I don't arrive here to have the freedom to research Chicago in the way that I was able to. Organizations at every turn ain't helping me in doing certain things, and providing you with information. And that's how we really push King legacies forward. Getting ready to show you something though that you can only see from the west side. This is the original Sears Tower to the country and to the city. It's still standing right now. So it's the only place in Chicago where you can see old Sears Tower and new. I imagine it's like a grandpa looking at his grandson, like, look at my boy, he done made it downtown.
Wow, wasn't that amazing? Dilla is so good at what he does. And another fun fact about the tribe, when we were starting out in years 1 and 2, we actually worked out of that old Sears Tower building. It's in Holman Square. So definitely, again, a lot of love to the West Side. As you can see, Dr. King lifted some very real challenges faced by Black Chicagoans at the time, challenges that still plague some of our communities today. But he also preached a message of the importance of solidarity between those communities with shared struggles. And that's what we want to explore today. To join us for this conversation, we have two leaders representing two neighboring communities: Little Village, which is also called South Lawndale, a predominantly Mexican American neighborhood on Chicago's southwest side, and North Lawndale, a predominantly Black neighborhood just west. Now I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Luis Gutierrez is the son of Mexican immigrants born and raised in Chicago's Little Village, where he serves as founder and CEO of Latinos Progresando. He is an innovator and a collaborator working to build diverse coalitions across communities and sectors. Like the One Lawndale movement, he also offers leadership and strategic guidance to numerous other organizations, serving as a member of the Board of Commissioners for the Chicago Housing Authority and a board member for multiple organizations ranging from Lincoln Park Zoo and the Nature Conservancy, Illinois, to AMPT Chicago and the ACLU of Illinois. Louise, we're so glad to have you with us. Welcome.
We're
Our
happy to be
second
here.
speaker, oh,
Sorry.
no worries. Chief Executive Officer of New Covenant CDC in North Lawndale. Rodney is an established leader with more than 30 years of business experience, both locally and globally. He formerly served as the co-director of the Continuing Education and Professional Development Division of Joseph Business School and currently serves as the board chair for Kids Above All. He is also the co-founder and chairman of the board of directors for the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, as well as the executive director of the North Lawndale Chamber of Commerce. Rodney, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Before we jump into our discussion, I'll just note that we are reserving some time at the end for audience questions. So please feel free to add any questions that arise to the chat or to the Q&A feature in the webinar, which you can find near the top of this window. Now let's get started. I'd love to know how each of you would describe your neighborhoods to folks who might not be familiar, and especially if there are any misperceptions that you think need correcting. Rodney, let's start
You
with
want to
you.
kick us off, Rodney?
Okay, great. Be glad to. So thank you for that question. So for me, North Lawndale is home. I actually grew up just 2 blocks east of North Lawndale, and my wife grew up in North Lawndale. So I like to call myself a North Lawndale in-law. I was there when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated as a kid. And so even though I wasn't directly in that neighborhood, I was able to see the impact from the few blocks away that I lived. So when I describe North Lawndale to people who may not know it, I always say this: the headlines don't tell the full story. People often focus on what's missing. So get jobs, investment, resources, but they overlook what's already there. And that is where the resiliency, creativity, and a whole lot of determination comes into play. There are businesses in North London whose owners have been holding it down for decades. There are families who chose to stay when they could have left and continue to invest in their neighborhoods and their blocks. There's faith, there's hustle, there's a strong sense of community that you don't always see from the outside. One of the biggest misconceptions that North Lawndale lacks is that North Lawndale lacks potential. That couldn't be further from the truth. What's missing is access to capital, information, to opportunity, and the people who are willing to see the community for what it truly is. Dr. King talked a lot about economic justice, and I think North Lawndale reflects exactly why that conversation is still so important today. The work we're doing now, supporting entrepreneurs, helping people move from surviving to owning, is really about giving people a fair shot. So when I think about North Lawndale, I don't think about deficits. I think about strength. I think about the possibility, and I think about a community that, despite everything it's been through, still believes in what it can become. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodney. I think you bring up some great points there. A part of the reason why we decided to root the tribe in North Lawndale is because when we were looking for the narrative, the stories about the communities there, we found that there is very much a news gap. So many times the news only goes to these communities to cover tragedies, but we were like, where is the history? Where are the stories about neighborhoods and families and the businesses? So there's more work to be done there. Luis, what about you? Can you tell us about Little Village?
Absolutely. Rodney, I think that was beautiful. First of all, I want to say I love Rodney Brown. He is an amazing person, an amazing leader, and I think North Lawndale is a beautiful community. And if you have not gotten out to visit, you definitely should, because there are some great people that hang out in North Lawndale. I grew up in South Lawndale. Some people know it as Little Village. And so a lot of the same things that Rodney talked about when you talk about a community that's hardworking and innovative and family that comes together and people that want to stay and make their community better. Somebody asked me the other day about ICE showing up to our neighborhoods and why people don't just leave. And, our community is resilient, and this is our community, and this is where we live, and this is where we work. And, the people that live here are not the problem. It's ICE coming down here and creating problems for people that live here. But if you ever want to see a community that's got great food and is colorful and everybody's friendly and everybody's willing to help you out, come and visit Little Village, and you're going to find a lot of that in our community.
Little Village has certainly been a testament for resilience and strength over the past year. Even facing so many threats from the federal government, coming together every Wednesday under the arch to blow whistles and invite community out and say that you're not alone. We don't need to be afraid. We have each other's backs. It shows just how strong that community really is. Let's turn to One Lawndale initiative. I'd love to hear how each of you have been involved and why you think this work matters right now. Luis, you've had a major role in this work. Can you tell us more about it?
Well, I think Rodney and I started it. That's how we've been involved. So Rodney and I had the opportunity to meet sometime in 2018-ish, 17, 18.
Sounds about right.
Can't,
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly when it was. And, at that time, Rodney had been doing a lot of work with the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council, as he still is. And I was running a network called, and I still am, the Marshall Square Resource Network. And when Rodney and I first sat down, we started to have conversations about the fact that, we're both working on housing issues. We're both working on education. We're both working on peace initiatives. We both share Douglas Park, which you saw in the video. We share 2 train stations. And, when I grew up in Little Village, I grew up 4 blocks from North Lawndale. I'd never met a Black person until I went to high school. And I think that that's an absolute tragedy for someone. And so Rodney and I started to have these conversations, and we started talking about why are we talking about South Lawndale and North Lawndale when we should be talking about One Lawndale and working together on a lot of these issues. And that's really how the conversation kicked off. And from there, we started to then bring people together just to have conversations. We started going to some NLCCC meetings. Some of their folks started coming to our meetings. We ended up starting the first cookout at Douglas Park to bring both communities together, and started calling it our Peace Party. And there's a lot more that happened after that. We can get into that a little bit later, but that's kind of how it kicked off. Oh, this actually, when COVID hit, Rodney and I and organizations in North Lawndale and South Lawndale started to do a lot of work together. And we all remember what happened on May 25th in 2020 with the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And so the steering committees for the North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council and steering committee for the Marshall Square Resource Network came together. And, we were working on combating what you were seeing in the news about Black and brown people not being able to work together. And we're like, there's all this beautiful work happening here. Nobody's highlighting that. But we also wanted to make a statement about what it meant for us to live through this tragedy and what we wanted to work towards in the future. And so our steering committees came together and released this beautiful statement, which I hope can be shared with the people that are on the call. But that was something that that just shows what our commitment was to each other during this time and moving forward. Rodney?
Thank you for that, Luis. And what Luis is not telling you guys that after our first meeting, one thing I said was I want to be like him when I grow up. Luis is an amazing leader, and he's an amazing connector when it comes to working together, pulling together collaborations. So while he and I started the conversation, Luis has always been the engine behind it, making sure that things happen, and making sure that the right people are at the table. But what I loved about One Lawndale initiative is that it wasn't about any one particular organization or one individual. It has been about the leaders of both communities coming together, not one institution, not one organization, but understanding what the people needed. And so in that room, we had faith leaders, we had business owners, we had community leaders, all talking about what does it take for us to come together, and as Luis pointed out, figure out how we can be stronger together. Again, this kind of happened around the time George Floyd was murdered, but the real initiative started, as he's mentioned, long before that, when he and I started talking about what can we do together, because again, we understand that working together, we're stronger than we are apart. We understand that working as collaborators is better than working as opposed to working in silos. And so when it comes to understanding what it takes, that's what we were looking at when we pulled this organization together. And why does that matter right now? Because communities like Lawndale don't need pilot programs. We don't need short-term fixes. We don't need coordinated investment, long-term. We do need long-term investments and coordinated thinking, because again, that's what pulls together the results we're looking to get done. Dr. King talked about our interconnectedness, our struggles, and how injustice anywhere affects justice everywhere. So One Lawndale reflects that idea in practice. And that's what we were looking for. We weren't looking just to put together stuff in theory and try to figure out how to make things look glossy. This was really about making sure we got together. We shared resources. We talked about how to help each other grow, those kind of things. That had never happened before. And so when I look at that kind of development, that kind of growth and that kind of connection, that's the model that we want to see replicated across the city, across this country. Thank you.
And Morgan, we also, Rodney and I were chairing, Sinai was opening up a new center and asked Rodney and I to chair the community conversations to see what it is that we wanted to see in this new building. And so we brought community leaders together from North and South Lawndale to just talk about what we wanted to see in the space, what we wanted it to feel like. We gave a lot of input into what we wanted to see in their new building. And as a result of our work, they named the building the One Lawndale Outpatient Surgical Center. So that was the first One Lawndale building to go up in our neighborhoods. And it's right across the street from the main hospital at Sinai. And so if you go in there, there's also, you can read some of the history on the wall, but that was a lot of the work that Rodney and I and the community leaders across Lawndale did with Sinai Hospital, which is a really cool project.
That's awesome.
If I can say one more thing, one of the things that was key to the collaborative was that when people walked into that building, they felt comfortable. They felt like they were at home. It didn't feel like a big institution that they weren't welcome in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. How have your respective communities responded to these efforts? Can you share any feedback or stories about how this has affected people?
I'll say that initially there was some hesitation because again, communities like ours always have people coming in with different initiatives and then leaving once the money runs out. So there was some hesitation initially, but I think when they saw us being consistent, when they saw us being connected to them and saw not only that, but we were inviting them to the table to have input, I think there you got an opportunity for them to say, okay, there's an opportunity for us to trust this initiative, trust these people that are part of this program, because again, they were coming to the table, they were invited to the table. And I think right now we could say there's some cautious optimism in terms of the fact that we're working together.
Yeah, and I'll add, in addition to that, there's years of people telling us why we shouldn't work together. There's been years of media reports about how we don't get along. There's been years of people benefiting from dividing and conquering our communities. And so, you throw all that on top of it. Of course, people are always skeptical at the beginning, but as Rodney said, once you show consistency and you show that you're showing up to actually do the work, and this is not about getting on the news, and this is not about a photo op, this is really about changing community, you start to see the transformation. And now we have a number of projects where we're working to build community centers throughout our neighborhoods. There's a number of organizations that have popped up now with the same concept of One Lawndale that are either building their own buildings, starting, arts organizations, just this feeling that we can bring people together and we can stop looking at this neighborhood versus that neighborhood. I think when you sit back and you start to see all of these organizations and all of these conversations and the growth and all that, it's a really beautiful thing to see. It's amazing. I didn't grow up that way. So what that's going to mean for the next generation of leaders, it's going to be an amazing group of people coming together to change our city.
Yeah, I have to give some snaps and kudos to y'all for still being committed to missions that came together during 2020, because a lot of people fell off. So if y'all are on this call and you had some things that you committed to doing in 2020 and you want to pick back up on it, let Luis and Rodney be an example and an inspiration. So One Lawndale work is a clear example of solidarity, and we need that now more than ever. I'm wondering if each of you could comment on the ways you've seen Black and Brown solidarity working and built locally. Luis, involved with the accelerator. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, Rodney, you want to go ahead? Really quickly.
I want to talk about accelerators. Go ahead.
So the Accelerator Fund was something that we also started in partnership with our brother Carlos Nelson, the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation, also after the murder of George Floyd. I was one of a small group of people that worked in the mayor's office during COVID to make sure that the mayor's office was getting resources out to the communities that were hardest hit by COVID. And so while I was in those meetings, I met Carlos Nelson and some other leaders, but I had never met Carlos Nelson in person. And so the murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of civil unrest, but when you looked at the media, a lot of the stories that you saw were these stories about Black and Brown people not being able to get together, violence in our communities, the same narrative that unfortunately gets pushed so often when they cover our neighborhoods. And so we were sitting in these meetings saying, well, what about all of these positive things that we've been doing and continue to do? And so I called Carlos and I asked him if I could come out and volunteer for his food pantry. I also went out to South Shore and I volunteered for their food pantry there. But when I went out to Auburn Gresham and I was with Carlos and his team, I mean, just such another beautiful community and a beautiful group of people. And what an amazing leader Carlos is as well. And so he and I started talking a lot about how suddenly there were resources for our community and Black and Brown leaders were being trusted with funding and general operating grants. And we were talking about why this couldn't be like this more often. And then, I started Latinos Progresando. Carlos was their GDC's first executive director. So we had a lot of things in common. And one of the things we talked about was, why was it so hard for somebody who wanted to dedicate their lives to making their community and their city better? Why was it so hard to grow our organizations? And how could we make it easier for the next generation of leaders so that they wouldn't have to struggle in growing their nonprofits the way that we did? And so we kind of put all in a pot and we mixed it up. And we met actually at Carlos Nelson's GAGDC's new community center, which is fabulous. But back then, there wasn't anything in it. We were in there in the winter with electrical lights on and everybody had their coats on. And we came up with the concept of the Accelerator Fund, which was a 5-year initiative to raise money and fund Black-led and Mexican-led nonprofits throughout the city, and then bring those organizations together to talk both about our similarities, but what we can do together to build a stronger city of Chicago. And so that 5-year initiative will end this May, but it's been an amazing experience.
That sounds amazing and so impactful. Rodney, what about you? Are there any examples you would like to uplift?
Well, we kind of touched on a little bit already, but one of the things I want to point out is as I said earlier, Luis is an amazing connector. You see how he brought those two organizations together. Same thing here in North Lawndale and South Lawndale. We have in North Lawndale, we have our North Lawndale Arts and Culture Festival every year. That now we have North Lawndale and South Lawndale participating every year in that event. And I'll tell you, one of the most memorable activities I've ever saw was when we had the little kids there. We had a dance competition for the kids, and for both communities, they were just having a great time. Even after the adults left, the kids kept dancing, kept competing with each other. They were having fun. They were enjoying each other. So while it wasn't the One Lawndale initiative, it was, again, another opportunity for our people and our kids to get together in a healing fashion. So as Luis mentioned, we have our peace parties in Douglas Park every year. So it's three different events we have every year. Get together, both communities come together just to enjoy each other, have fun, talk, etc. So outside of the fact that we're working together on this initiative, we create opportunities for the two communities to join together. I also look at it from my perspective as economic development, that we have to also make sure the businesses are working together as well. So we cross partnership there as well. We try to figure out how we can work together, our chambers, their chambers. So we're looking at, again, understanding that economic development is a key ingredient to sustainability in terms of being self-sufficient. So we put all those things together, and all those things are additional ingredients that go into the pot, if you will, as relates to creating other opportunities for us to work together.
I love the way this is breaking down barriers and bringing people together. Now, let's turn to some questions from the audience. I saw some questions popping up on the screen.
Morgan,
Something you wanted to
can
say?
I
Luis?
just
Go to the
Yeah,
audience.
because I do one more thing, because there's a really cool project that Rodney and I, this whole One Lawndale initiative really started with conversation and bringing people together, and that's still a huge goal for us, because I think when you bring people together, there's just opportunity. But we started to be very intentional about helping each other with our community centers. And so a couple of years ago, through this One Lawndale work, we started to think about raising money to help some of the organizations who were in the process of building their own community centers. And so, Rodney, who do we have? Sinai, who's building something for wheelchair basketball on the rooftop.
The building, yes. Mhm.
Carol Robertson, Center for Learning, who is about to cut the ribbon March 4th. The One Lawndale Children's Discovery Center, who's about to go up right around the Kedzie and Ogden area. North Lawndale Community Coordinating Council working on a grocery store. New Covenant working on a business incubator. So these are community centers that are being built based not just on the work that we're doing in the One Lawndale initiative, but money that we've been able to raise and then to fund these projects. So I don't know, Rodney, if you want to talk a little bit about that experience. I think that's an amazing project. And again, also a project supported by United Way.
Okay, we have to be quick but Roddy, go.
What I'll say again is as Luis pointed out, that is another example of continuing the work that we're doing. And I want to point out that New Covenant, we're having a new building that's going to be built on the corner of Roosevelt and Costner. It's already under construction. I went by the other day to start to build it. So again, that is a result of us working together and sharing resources. And I'll stop there for the sake of time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you both. I want to go to the Q&A now. Thank you. Caitlin?
Thank you. Hi. So I'll just remind our audience, I'm Caitlin Klosser-Pert from United Way. I'll just remind our audience, feel free to add your questions to the chat and also to the Q&A function. A question, though, that I'd love to present to both of you. How would you recommend our audience get involved with what One Lawndale is up to with your respective organizations? What would be your call to action?
I'll start. I'm always a proponent of, the easy answer is always give us money. But I'm also a firm believer that we need connections. We need access to resources. And I talk about resources, not just about money, but it's about who you know that can also be leveraged for us down the road. So if you really want to get engaged, I tell people all the time, don't just come in, paint a wall, cut some grass. Come in, join the organization. Walk with us side by side, understand what our problems are, what our issues are. Because in my opinion, when my problem becomes your problem, now we're connected.
I think that's a great way to put it, Rodney, because volunteering is great, but it's also work for the organizations. And so when you get people that call you and say, I have got this idea for a new project, that's great, but that's just added work. And so, Rodney, I completely agree. If you want to get involved, show up and become part of what the organization is doing, and then figure out how to help and how to connect. I think that's fantastic.
Great. Thank you all so much. Another question, what advice would you give for getting multiple community-based organizations to collaborate more openly, especially when they're all volunteer-led organizations?
Well, I would say, you have to spend some time together. When Rodney and I first started working on this, we weren't really having necessarily meetings. We were just meeting up to get to know each other. And I think that's so important in this work. A lot of times we see collaborations and we think that, everything happens from one day to the next and you can just put a group together and magic starts to happen. And I'm sure that's happened in some places, but I think, it takes a lot longer than that. And I think we have to understand that this is a marathon. This is for the long run. We're not trying to do something for tomorrow. We're trying to do something for the rest of our lives and for the next generation. And so it's really important to create space where you can come together and get to know each other and then be honest with each other and start building from there.
And I'll just say, ditto to that, because I think at the end of the day, it really does become about getting to know each other and about trust. And it takes time to build that trust. And Luis and I we didn't just have one meeting and say, okay, you're the greatest thing in the world, let's go work together. It took time for us to understand what each other's looking for. And then for us to come to the conclusion that, yeah, we do have similar problems, similar issues. Now let's find some common resources to fix those issues.
Great, thank you. And kind of as a follow-up to that question, do you suggest MOUs to maintain connections?
It's interesting. Ordinarily, I would. We didn't necessarily put one together initially, but I think what the MOU does, it helps to clarify exactly what the expectations are so that down the road, there's no confusion. Memories tend to fade and some people remember things differently. So sometimes MOU is necessary. But I like to say that in this case in particular, I said we never really put together MOU to work together. We just knew after spending time together that we were on the same page and we were going to work together, and that if there's any differences or issues, we would talk them out.
Yeah, I agree. We didn't start with an MOU. I think we probably, when we started to figure out how we were going to use money with the different capital projects that we were working on, that's kind of where we sat down and said, okay, there has to be a way to engage because there's, 6 leaders at 7 leaders, 7 projects, whatever it is on the table. How do we make decisions? How do we figure out, who gets a grant of this size versus a grant of that size? And then that's kind of where we sat down and got a little bit more into how do we want to engage each other and make these decisions. And that's when the MOU came together.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Another question, how do we bring Black and Latina people into healing spaces in the context of the 2024 election results? This speaker says they understand the distrust that was built from seeing the breakdown of Latina votes, although so many people in our Chicago community are unable to vote.
That's tough. But again, in my mind, it boils down to what we talked about already. You have to understand that there are common issues here. The powers that be would love to separate the two and make us feel like we're enemies. But at the end of the day, we have the same issues. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that it's clear that my problems are your problems. And I've said to people a lot of times, they may not be coming after us today, but when they get through with the other group, they're coming for us. So where I grew up on Roosevelt Road, and I remember thinking that there were people who were moving out of my community to go somewhere else. But then what happened was that as soon as they moved out of my community, then the people that meant no good followed them to the next community. So it's not a question of it's us versus them. It's if we don't support each other now, we become next.
I think there's a couple of things that we want to think about during this time. I think, we've seen what happens when we're separated. We see the result. We're living the result right now. When we start to say, this community versus that community, you have something that I need to have, and we start looking at things from that perspective, we get to where we are now. And so I think if you think about the larger picture of that, and keep that in mind and let that work move forward in a different way, we'll have a different result. I also think that, it's really important to use every opportunity that you can to come together and talk about, as Rodney said, what are our similarities? Because if we're only coming together when something goes wrong, that's a really hard time to build trust. We were able to put out our One Lawndale statement and do the things that we did because we had been working together for some time before that. And so Now that the elections are over and we are where we are, I think the opportunity here is how do we have more conversations about what we're all going through? And how do we have more conversations about how we all want to move forward together and, respect and build on each other's successes? And I think if we start to do that, we'll get to where we want to be.
I'd like to chime in on that as well because, you know, we're in an age where there's just a proliferation of misinformation and polarizing political language that tells everybody that it's us versus them or uplifts any type of issue of distrust between communities. And I think getting people offline and in person, in community, getting to know each other is so important, even just to share basic information. Because once people are in community, then they're like, oh, I care about this person. And now it's like, I care about this community and this community's issues. And also from a narrative change perspective, we try to deter people from the us versus them narratives to talk more about power, how power works and how systems work, so that we're not getting so honed in on these arguments and debates about what this group has versus what that group has. It's about how power and systems work.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your thoughts here. Another question from our audience: what steps do you recommend for this audience member to bring Brown and Black communities and leaders together across Austin, Belmont Cragen, and Humboldt Park and Garfield Park?
When I think about how we pulled together NOCCC, for example, we sat down with people that were both identified as leaders and those who were not and said, what do you want to see in this community? What do you want to see going forward? And we then made sure that they felt heard and that we listened to what they wanted to make happen, and we involved them in that process. So as you talk about community, connecting to the different communities, again, as we've talked about, we have to first identify what are the common issues that we have to work on, because we have more in common than we have differences. And so when we look at it from that perspective, it makes it easier for us to make it clear that, number one, I'm not just here for me, I'm here for you as well. Because again, working for you works for me. So I think initially, let's get everybody together, have a conversation about what's important, what we're looking for. And I think in the course of those conversations, you start to hear the common issues that people have to address.
And I'll just add that yes to all of that, and have a little patience with yourself. Again, this is not work that happens overnight. It takes time. Building trust is not something that happens from today to tomorrow. So be consistent and have a little patience with yourself and celebrate the victories as small as they are.
Great. Thank you so much. Another question. Funding is always an issue. How are your partner organizations navigating the current cuts for operating today and for longevity?
It's a tough time. It's a tough time for nonprofits. The sector is in some ways being attacked. A lot of the organizations who get federal funding or government funding, I should say, are dealing with a lot of uncertainty right now, and it's creating a lot of anxiety for folks who run organizations and folks who have kids in programs, for example. And so there's not really an easy answer right now in terms of how to deal with it. I think leaders are trying to figure out what their budgets look like and try to be as efficient as possible. But we have to continue to organize, and we live in a state where I think our elected officials have actually been stepping up and doing what needs to be done for the sector. And so that's a great thing, but it is a really difficult time right now.
I'll just echo everything that Luis just said. In addition to that, we have to have the attitude that we're not going to give up, we're not going to quit. So it causes us to be more resourceful, more creative in terms of how we continue. I lean on my staff to figure out, okay, what are things we can do differently today that we weren't doing before if we don't have additional dollars. So sometimes that means we call on more volunteers. We also have partners in philanthropy that are stepping up, trying to figure out how they can close some of those gaps. But all in all, to what Luis is saying, it's a lot tougher today than it was before.
Thank you all so much. And one more question here, and I apologize. So when you engage both communities for input, how did you bridge language differences in the conversation to foster shared understanding? Did you have translators? Did you use an interpreter? If you
Yes.
could speak to that. Yes.
Yes, we did that. And so we have a group where we have headsets, we have a interpreter, and so we translate everything and we go back and forth.
Yeah.
So it's really important. I will tell you, it takes a longer time. It does take longer, but the results speak for themselves.
And I think that's an important step because it shows the effort we're making to make sure that everybody gets a chance to have their say and that they're heard.
Thank you. Yes, so important to feel heard and be able to speak in. So thank you. Um, one more question. What are some upcoming activities that we can help support or attend in the near future at both organizations and in both communities? And Morgan, if you'd like to chime in with anything the tribe has going on, we'd love to hear that as well.
Well, there's ongoing activity today, of course, celebrating Martin Luther King Day at North Lawndale. So you can go to our local churches and organizations to figure out part of what's going on. But always, we also have an annual arts and cultural festival that you can join us the first Saturday in August. But between now and then, there'll be a number of different activities that are going to be going on. We have one of our organizations is building new homes in the community, so they always have events and training for that. There's different food giveaways and other activities that's going on with NLCCC. So again, just look at our website, nlccplanning.org, and you can find what's going on there as well.
Yeah, I would say we have our annual MEX Talks event coming up on May 7th. We have a lot of community activities, but as you can imagine right now with ICE planning to come back to Chicago this spring, we're working with our parent leaders to figure out what those events are going to look like. So we're not publicizing those yet. But MEX Talks, May 7th, you can find information on our website, latinospro.org, or find us on all the social media channels.
For the tribe, as you all know, we're reshaping the narrative of Black Chicago always. But one really important initiative that we're doing is that we have a membership program. And when you join our membership, you get a weekly newsletter about narrative change. So if you're interested in how to kind of like deepen some of these narratives that are divisive, we actually share our editorial framework with folks. And I think for people doing work like this, learning how to dispel misinformation, learning how to do more community-centered communications and storytelling, that would be a great way to stay connected to the tribe in our work and also learn something. So that newsletter is called Reshape.
Great, thank you. And Morgan, actually, just one other question specifically for you. Could you point to, we've talked about how there's a lot of misinformation out there. Can you point to some recent articles from the tribe that you'd recommend to help dispel some of that misinformation?
What articles are we talking about now? Well, as a part of our Reshape series, I actually did a Q&A with a law professor who's rooted on the South Side of Chicago, but it's about how to stop ICE. I think there's so many protests, but people don't actually know what political mechanisms and levers need to be pulled to actually stop ICE. So one thing that we try to do at the tribe is like direct people's anger towards the right source. Okay, so yeah, that piece really talks about what your congressional leaders could be doing to stop ICE, because I think we're looking at our local leaders, we're looking at the local police, we're looking at our mayors, but what we're dealing with is a federal issue. So for ICE specifically, it has to be dealt with on a federal level. So if you're interested in that and kind of like narrative strategy around how to stop ICE, that's one story that we're reshaping right now.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that was all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for your insightful contributions and all the great work you're doing.
Caitlin, can I just add one more thing
please.
before we go? I'm so sorry, but we know that ICE is planning to come back to Chicago. So Morgan, thank you for sharing that information. And I think for everybody out there who wants to go out in the streets and protest, please, peaceful protests. It is not the same as it used to be. And when I think about the work of Dr. Martin Luther King and everybody in that generation, they did a lot of work to make sure that people like me grew up in a country where we thought that this would never happen again. And so here we are, unfortunately, at this time, and it's our generation's turn to do what's necessary so that future generations can grow up in a country where they will not experience this. And so as you go out there, please keep those things in mind and make sure that we make our voices heard, but that we do it in a peaceful way, because we know that there are some people who want it not to be peaceful.
Thank you so much. Any other parting words from anyone?
Thank you for this opportunity. And again, I would encourage all the people listening to, as Luis's pointed out, if you're going to go out and protest, do so peacefully, but do so with the thought that this isn't just about me, it's about all of us.
Absolutely. And I appreciate everyone's work and your impact. I know that you've inspired me today. I want to definitely keep in touch so that the tribe can uplift your work and get it to our audience. So I hope that those of you listening today came away with something that you'll bring back to your people, your community, and to be more connected and empowered.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Just as a couple ways to kind of keep in touch with United Way and with the future series of our events, there's a QR code on your screen that will take you to our events page. You can find out about events like this that are upcoming and other events in our organization. Another thing that we're doing, if you've ever been interested in serving on a nonprofit board of directors, or if you are on a board and interested in learning more, we have a board training program called our Board Leadership Institute, and our applications are currently open. And then we just recommend come join an event, consider volunteering. Donating is always a great way to get involved, and then subscribe to the tribe and keep up with all the things that are going on. Thank you all so much for spending your day with us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Martin Luther King Jr. Day.